We are rocking and rolling, man.
262, baby.
Love it, love it, love it. Here we go. It's rock. It's a end of the week, kind of end of the week for you and I. Not for trading. We still got one more day to trade, but it's Monday through Thursday.
Monday through Thursday, folks. And Jared is handling all of what were dancing bears, and now I suppose it's bulls.
He's got some
bulls. Because,
bulls.
the market turned itself around from not a wicked sell-off, but a little bit of a sell-off. And now you might even call it a wicked rally, Pete.
Yeah.
Because definitely.
And especially, John, if you go back to yesterday and you get to the final 2 hours yesterday where we recovered in an amazing way. We didn't get all the way into positive except for the NASDAQ, but the Dow bounced back. The S&P bounced back in a big way. Got the NASDAQ actually finished up into the green. And now we're sort of making that same type of a move, but at least it started early enough in the day. We'll see if we hold on. That'll be interesting.
Yeah. And I'm not sure what the optimism is about here, Pete, but we'll get into that with the rest of the show, folks. Let's kick it off with the macro minute. The macro minute from me today, Pete, is going to be that we are going to have a recession because that's the way the world works. This was by a lady who manages, $200 billion over at TCW. She was speaking yesterday in New York, Pete, at a Delivering Alpha conference. And that's a pretty strong statement. She's not saying whether we're going to have one. She says we are going to have a recession.
Well, the one thing I would add to that, John, is we already had one last summer. For all the people who didn't really realize it, we did. So it doesn't mean it's the worst thing in the world. And just like I said then, I'll say now, it isn't a depression. It's not a depression, folks. Yeah, it's more of like here we are. We got this going on and that. It's not the worst thing in the world. And I think that's why a lot of people didn't even realize where we were last year. But interesting, it's always interesting to hear from that. I think the most interesting thing for me right now, John, is keeping an eye on crude. And I think that's part of what we're seeing right now with the market going up a little bit and making that turn. We were at 94 for crude, and now we've kind of eased back off of that. As we've eased back off of that, maybe that's an excuse to get a little bit more bullish on the market.
Yeah, 92.52 at mid-session here, folks, for the crude oil contract in the U.S., but that's still way elevated, and it's going to inflict pain. All right, let's talk about fantastic futures. Well, earlier today, and this could be the other reason we helped turn around the market, Pete, it's not just crude, but the 10-year was over 465. 465, the highest in 15 years. And you will keep hearing that, folks, because I think we're going higher still, but I hope we don't go too much higher. Right now, that is my fantastic futures. Right now at mid-session, the 10-year broke back down to 461. It's not a big drop, but it's a little, and every little bit helps.
Yep, it's that easing back. I just talked about that with crude. We've had a little bit of an easing back in the 10-year, but we are still at very inflated levels, relatively speaking. So I think that's a good one to keep an eye on, John, like you said. I'd also even say keep an eye on natural gas. If you go back to March and August, we're near those highs once again, near $3. We didn't quite get to $3 today, but I think $2.93 maybe, something like that. Big moves in nat gas. You've talked about it. I've talked about it. Crude oil, nat gas, these moves to the upside, definitely something I think you want to keep a very close eye on right now, especially from the futures perspective.
Absolutely. And that 10-year chart that Jared had for us there, Pete, that it was at the end of August, it was 4% for the 10-year. And like I say, today hit 466 on the highs, I think. That's a pretty big run. And that's one of those reasons that we cited it for fantastic futures, even though it hardly feels fantastic for any of us.
Definitely.
All right, let's jump on JBL, Pete, because this was one of them right out the gate this morning. It was up. Why? Because earnings were 245 versus 231. So that's a nice beat. Revenue missed ever so slightly. It was 8.5 billion they expected. It came out 8.46. That's a slight miss. They added 2.5 billion to their share buyback. And Pete, the best news was the guidance. And that's why this one was pushing to the upside pretty fast.
Yeah, and that guidance was pretty impressive, John. But again, it's kind of like what they released today. They beat the heck out of it on the earnings side of it. Revenue a little bit light. When they projected out what they look at for the earnings, 260 versus 233, that's great. But the revenue, once again, a little bit light. But I think what really is moving this stock around today, and 118.84, I think it might have even gotten higher than that, John. But year to date, this is a stock that's up 54% already. So another 13% coming today. You got to like that. The selling of that mobility unit is another thing. $2.2 billion there. And on top of that, you've got the buybacks of $2.5 billion. They already still had the old buybacks in place as well, which was a pretty decent number. So with all of that, you can understand why this stock is doing so well today.
Well, I got one for you, Pete, that obviously we saw it a lot when we were growing up, Chico's, CHS. And you would have thought that this would have been a big deal at a lot higher takeout. But instead, Sycamore Partners are coming in, so it's not going to be publicly traded anymore. It'll be private until they spin it out again, Pete. It'll be private, but they're paying $7.60. It's flatlined today at $7.50, up 62%. That's a $1 billion valuation. What do you think about this deal for Chico's FAS?
Well, first of all, the Sycamore Partners, this is what they do, right, John? I mean, they acquire what they think is great in the retail space. And, hats off to them. They've done very well over the years. Tell you who's not doing very well. This Chico's, John, has had a very, very large short interest, a lot like many of these names, Gap stores and some of the others. But, 11, 13% on that short side. Well, those guys are not feeling good because I went back and looked at this thing over time. It is now near the higher end of where it's been over recent times. So wherever they shorted, they're in trouble because this is a jump up and it's $7.60, a 60% plus move to the upside. There's some folks out there that are not too happy about this move, and those shorts are definitely getting squeezed today. They can only get squeezed up to 760. I mean, they're not going to be going past there, but they're short from a lot lower, that's for sure.
Yeah, and folks, if you pull up a graph in September of 2020, this one was under $1, under $1. So, it's a heck of a return for anybody who bought it back then. Mm-hmm. But I can remember, Pete, when Chico's was kind of a pretty big fashion, in particular for ladies of a certain age. And it was $45-50 a share.
Yeah.
And went down to that $1 that I spoke of. So that was pretty damn ugly. So it's I guess they're finally getting that squeeze going and hopefully getting some money back for some of the people that have lost so much. All right, let's focus on SSYS. Why? Well, because SSYS, they're basically a company that works with 3D printing solutions, Pete. And I remember when these guys were hot. Well, today they're moving to the upside. They basically stepped away. They terminated a merger with Desktop Metal. And instead, they're saying, hey, board of directors, find us a buyer.
Yeah, they're out on the search, John. These poor guys, I'll tell you, the stock, when you look at the 52-week lows and highs, we were edging right near those lows, John, right around 11. Here we are now trading, I think, above 13 or something like that. But the higher end was just short of $22. I think the interesting thing, Eden Prairie, Minnesota is where they're based. That's just about 30 miles or so about that way or something like that. They do have a good cash position, John. It's an interesting company, 3D. We don't hear about that anymore. Remember how hot that was not too many years ago? Everybody was on the 3D bandwagon and this, that, and the other. And somehow that kind of got left in the weeds, and maybe that's part of the problem. But certainly by terminating the one merger and trying to get out there and strategically find the right folks, I think that's an interesting move. I think it's a move that probably had to be done. And when you see where the stock is, relatively speaking, in the last 52 weeks, you can understand why they're trying to make some changes to get something a little bit more higher, something that's going to get this stock to start moving to the upside.
Yeah, and they'll have to, obviously that little bit of a squeeze that's going on right now with that isn't over yet. No. This was a $44, $50 stock back in 21, Pete. So it's a third of that or less than a third of that now. So it gives you an idea that what Pete's talking about when he says, yeah, remember when everything was all about 3D printing? Well, not so much anymore. And they need a strategic partner. Let's talk about Worthington Industries, Pete. WOR, down hard. These guys are like value-added stuff for steel processing. So whether it's welded solutions and things like that, or steel laminations, that's what Worthington WOR does. They're down pretty hard today. They beat in a big way on top line, and then revenue came in a little light, and that appears to be why they are hammering on WOR today.
Yeah, it's really pretty interesting, the hammering it's taking, John, which means to me that because of that, scratch my head a little bit and start thinking about it. This is maybe one of those names where you might want to step in. And the reason I say that is they've been doing everything right. When you look, a year ago, they earned $1.60. This time around, they earned $2.06. They got some pretty nice growth there when you look at that. Now, revenue being a little bit light, understandable why somebody's going to scratch their head at that. But I don't really mind it as much, John. If I'm going to miss, I would rather miss on some of my revenue than I would on my earnings. And hopefully the revenue is something that's going to change and you can get that moving into the future. So we'll see how that plays out. But this is a stock that was actually right, not too far off of the 52-week highs. And now it's pulled back substantially down, 13%, something like that today, somewhere in the $60 range. 77 was the 52-week high. It wasn't all that far away from that. So when I look at everything going forward, I'm starting to think that this one might be one to consider. If you're looking for something in the material space, you're looking in the steel space, Worthington might be at least worth checking out. I'm not saying it's a buy, but I think I'm going to look a lot closer at this one and try to figure out, is this a buy? And it sort of feels like it might be.
Yeah. I tell you, Pete, this is one that's kind of the opposite of a couple of those. Like Chico's, like we said, and also for the most part, like SSYS. You look at this one, it was significantly lower in 2021, and it's been backing and filling since. And maybe one of the reasons that it's on hold or they've hit pause is because, businesses that would be, because no customer, no individual is really a buyer here. This is business to business. So these are for big businesses that they're doing these things that Worthington does. So it's not quite like Ford or GM or whatever that sells to the public. They sell to other businesses. And I think a lot of those are on hold right now.
Yeah.
All right. What do you got as far as sports, Pete?
John, how about this? College football. I think we're finally getting into real college football. It's no longer about somebody who's ranked number 4 in the country playing somebody who's got state and IE and EI and all this other stuff. I mean, now it's actually real competition. And that's where things get pretty daggone interesting. And we start to find out a little bit more about some of these teams. Maybe they're coming off of a loss. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're on a roll. Can they continue to roll? So I picked out a couple of games that I thought would be really fun. Now, one of them is tomorrow night, and it's in Corvallis, which is up in Oregon. That's where Oregon State hangs their hat, John. Utah, number 10 in the country, they have not shown much on offense this year. They're going up against Oregon State. Oregon State has looked really, really good. Now, they finally got a loss, but this is a team that with the quarterback they've got, the transfer from Clemson, I'm not even going to try to pretend to do his name, but they're pretty outstanding. They're a really good football team, top, bottom. When you look at special teams and defense and offense, they do it all. So that's one of the games. Then you've got Kansas playing Texas. That should be pretty fun as well. Kansas got a great quarterback, good offense. And then, of course, Texas ranked number 3. A lot of people talking about Texas might be the best team in the country. You haven't heard that from me because they've played nobody so far, for the most part. They had Alabama, but Alabama's not Alabama. I don't know what's going on with that squad, John. Can't figure out a quarterback, not the same on defense. They just don't look like Alabama's looked. So that win It's still a great win on the road, all that kind of stuff. But it's a different Alabama team. I think the most interesting thing would be to say Notre Dame and Duke. And why do I say that? Because Duke's got a quarterback. They're 4-0. This kid's athletic. He can run. He can throw. He really looks like the part of a really good quarterback. Notre Dame's got to bounce back after a tough loss with Ohio State at home up in South Bend. That one I think will be interesting. And I got one last thing for you too, John. Then you can tell me your favorite games. But there's a sleeper player out there from Syracuse, the quarterback. I had the opportunity to watch him last year because he played against my Golden Gophers in the Pinstripe Bowl. And I was watching the kid going, the kid's pretty damn good football player. He does a lot. He's one of those dual threat guys, John, and he's a heck of a quarterback. This will be the test, though, this week. They're going to play a not great, but still Clemson. They're 2-2, good football team. They always are. They're always going to be competitive. They used to be great. Maybe they're not great this year. But this quarterback, Garrett Schrader, is going to be worth watching. He can run. He can throw. He's big. He's strong. He does a lot of things. And, oh, by the way, Syracuse is still undefeated at 4-0.
Well, I'm bullish on that game, Pete. I am not bullish on Duke because just like you said about Notre Dame, I got to think they cover and cover big. And here's why. Even if that quarterback's as good as you say, Pete, they have to be just feeling the pain of that multilateral game against Miami, where Miami just, came back at the very end. That's one of those things that makes you hurt for more than just a week. Colorado, they probably are still stinging from that loss that Oregon put on them. Mm-hmm. But I think 23 is too many, Pete. 23 is what USC is giving. Now, I see a lot of people saying it's going to play closer than that. I certainly believe that. But, again, if they play like they played up in Oregon and they can't stop anything, run or pass, then, they're up against the Heisman Trophy winner from last year. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, like you've said, he hasn't really played like he played last year. I'm hoping for my Buffaloes that he doesn't get his mojo going this week, and I am going to take the points. One more that I'll throw out just real quick, Penn State, Northwestern. I would say Northwestern doesn't even need to be on the field against these guys. I don't know how, Pete, with all the problems with Northwestern, how they're going to stay with these guys, because Penn State is smash mouth football, and they're given 25.5. So I guess if you're saying, well, John, you're taking 23 from USC at Colorado, would you take this at Northwestern? Nope. I think they could drill them 50-10 or whatever. I mean, Penn State is tough. So, I think those two games are really interesting for me, Pete.
Yeah. Well, the one thing about Caleb Williams too, John, that scares me for Colorado, because, Colorado, let's be honest, that game could have been 80-0. It really could have been. And they called off the dogs. They ran the football, took their star quarterback, Bo Nix, out of the game and all that, because Colorado's defense just could not stop them. USC has not looked great. That being said, Caleb Williams has got 15 touchdowns and no interceptions. So even though they just kind of been meandering around, and I know they're a top 10 team, all the rest of the story that we all know, but they just don't feel like that powerhouse. They're not putting the hurting on people. And I wonder, is this the week that they do? I don't have an answer to that other than to say that defense, John, if they play like they did against Oregon, that game could get even uglier. Just remember this when you're betting. When you go on the road, you don't have all your players. You only have about 60 in general, I think. So 60 rather than 100, which means there's only so many guys that can get out of the field and play. So you're not going all the way down to the fourth and fifth stringers, John. You've got to go with the second and thirds, maybe. And so USC second and thirds are pretty damn good. So that game will be interesting, and we'll see, because as I've said, I thought they were a little overrated anyway, and now they dropped out a little bit, and it'll be interesting to see how this whole thing plays out. How about the NFL? We've got the Detroit Lions going to Lambeau tonight, John, and I think that should be pretty fun. That's the big showdown game. I mean, we're talking about the NFC North, used to be NFC Central, all that rest of that kind of stuff. But the reality is, when's the last time Detroit was relevant? I really don't care because they're relevant this year and they're playing really well. And our buddy Jared Goff, Cal Berkeley, that guy has played well. By the way, the people who forgot that the guy did play in a Super Bowl, I'm not sure why everybody kind of thinks this guy's some second-rate quarterback. He's not. It just wasn't working any longer with him, and so they made the trade. But all that being said, I'll tell you what, John, the Packers, at first I kind of was kicking myself and saying I need to have a little humble pie here because, I was wrong on Jordan Love. All of a sudden I started looking a little closer today, and let me tell you about Jordan Love. 53% completion. Now, that don't work too well. That dog doesn't hunt in the NFL for very long, John. So he better either play a lot better than that. Now, that being said, he's only thrown 1 interception in 3 games. So he's done a good job of holding on to the ball. He's had 7 touchdown passes, and I really liked what I've seen out of him. But I have to tell you, that kind of, I started looking at it a little closer going, well, at 53% completion, who have they played? Well, they played a couple of teams. Atlanta, who's pretty awful. They played New Orleans, who without their quarterback, he got hurt. And they had to come back from being down 17 to win 18-17, 18 points in the fourth quarter. Great job, but that's against the backup quarterback, who's pretty awful, Jameis Winston. So I don't know about the Packers. And if they play the way they've looked the first 3 weeks, I think the Detroit Lions are going to look pretty dang good in this game, John, because they've done it with throwing, they've done it with running, they've done it with defense, they've done all the things that Dan Campbell preaches about. And how do you not love that guy as the coach of the Detroit Lions? I mean, he's the best.
I think they win, Pete, tonight because it is Thursday night football. So that means, folks, you got to have Amazon Prime or you can't watch. That's the way it is. And I think that's stupid on the NFL's part, but nonetheless, that's what they did. And, you got to, luckily you and I have Prime, but there's a lot of football fans who probably don't. So I'm sorry for you, but that's the way it is. The one good thing, like you said it, and you kind of glossed over it though, Pete, Jordan Love only 53%, but you did cite the 7 touchdowns. So his 7 touchdowns to 1 interception, that's a good ratio.
Yeah.
So if the Lions can get in his head or get in his lap with their pass rush, and they've got some monsters that can do that, if they get in his face, this will be the biggest challenge he faces, at least so far this year, because New Orleans got a good defense, but it's old. I think, Pete, even though they've got a Cal guy, number 94 on their line in New Orleans, he's old. He's not the same as he was when he was in his early 20s. These guys are like 24 and they can run and they can hit and they're going to try to get to him. So with all the injuries that Jordan Love and the Packers have, I'm thinking that Detroit puts a beating on them. But I'm not hoping for it, even though I'm, reluctantly a Bears fan. Bears hate Packers. But I'm going to say that Jordan Love isn't going to be the reason they lose tonight, unless, they just park a guy in the backfield, like I say, in Jordan Love's lap. If they don't do that, I think it's going to be that their defense can't stop Detroit, and that Detroit's going to play like they can play, especially on this big stage tonight.
Yep, and Jared Goff, John, he's been great all year. He's 70% completion. The guy's done a really good job. Aiden Hutchinson's one of those defensive linemen you were referencing for Detroit. He's a monster, and he will get in that backfield. And he's just, Jordan Love just has to get rid of the ball quicker. I mean, the problem he's got going on, and this is not him. So again, it's something where he's going to have to deal with it. But he's been missing, John, 3 of the pieces of his offensive line. He's had a lot of other injuries on that team. It's like a MASH report every week. And it's been tough. So when they get all healthy, maybe, hopefully for them, in the middle of the season or whenever it happens, they could make a run because, like I said, the little bit I've seen on Jordan, I think he's done a nice job, basically moving that team and getting them to the next level and running with the ball when he has to because he's an athletic and he's a big kid. he can run pretty well. And if he can do that tonight, if he can escape some of those guys getting after him, and he can get out there on the edges and maybe get a few runs out of it where he maybe makes a first down or, 8-10 yards downfield and slides, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. If he can do that, they can hang in there for quite a while. But I think right now, the way I'm looking at it, Detroit is a team of destiny this year. I really believe that. I think that they are well coached and they're really solid on both sides of the ball. And that's kind of what it takes to get into the playoffs and get into the deep part of the playoffs.
That's true. And I think they literally, Pete, have all the pieces in place in Detroit to make a nice run into the playoffs. Mm-hmm. Then it's a question of how healthy are you? And, does the defense, does Hutchinson and the rest of that crew play like you and I think they can? If they do, they could go deep in the playoffs, because that's a team that people don't want to play. That's, as our friend Ray Hitchcock says, that's a salty team. Yeah, they like to smash you right in the face. Yeah. And that's the way the coach was, and that's the way the players are. So we'll see tonight. Yeah. All right. This is the last one of the week, folks. This is the Rebels Edge. Make sure you check out marketrebellion.com/get started so that you can up your game if you need education on options trading, or if you need subscriptions. We've got a bunch. Check it out at marketrebellion.com/get started. And we will see you Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time.